I want to tell you about my day yesterday, first of all. I listen in the train. I went up to New York for the United Nations General Assembly, and then in the evening, RT, which does we produce a television program that we co-produce with RT that we license, sell to them, whatever you call it, and. So they had a party last night, and I went to the party, and in fact, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, came by, which was pretty amazing. It's like all of a sudden the cocktail party just goes, oh! It was at the Waldorf Astoria, fancy place. Now owned by the Chinese, by the way. In fact, I was talking to one of the waiters, and he made a comment about something international. I said, yeah, who would have thought that, a Russian media group would be having a meeting in a hotel owned by the Chinese, and it would be the Waldorf in New York. And he was like, yeah, I can't believe it. About, how much of America is being bought up by 1/7 of all assets in the United States are now owned by foreign persons or foreign countries. It's pretty amazing. But anyhow, I wanted to share with you what I heard and didn't hear in the speeches by President Obama and President Putin yesterday, because I thought, and I'm actually quite hopeful about this, but I'm the eternal optimist, and so I don't know, maybe I shouldn't be. But first of all, what I didn't hear from President Putin was that Russia has they have, I believe, 2 military bases in Syria, a deep-water seaport and an airport, an Air Force base. And I think if it was just said something like this, Americans might understand, why Russia is concerned about the future of the government in Syria. We have a big military base, an Air Force base, and a deep-water port in Qatar. If Qatar was under attack by ISIS, and Qatar's government, is one of the more benevolent dictatorships in the region, but it's still a dictatorship, and they stifle dissent in ways that would make Fidel Castro look like a pussycat, and as do all the Gulf states, or most of the Gulf states, as far as I know, all of the Gulf states. And if Qatar was being invaded by ISIS, we would not be sitting around having a debate about whether or not to keep the Emir of Qatar in office, no matter how badly he reacted to it. We would be going into cleaning out ISIS and trying to stabilize the country and then get into a conversation about what to do about the government, which is what I hope comes out of the meeting between President Putin and President Obama yesterday. We'll see. I mean, I haven't discussed this with anybody in American or Russian public office, or government. This is just my opinion. The second thing, what I didn't hear from President Obama was that if George W. Bush had not started, and although President Putin referred to this in his speech, if George W. Bush had not started the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and totally destabilized the region, in all probability, what had begun as protests by refugee farmers in the major cities of Syria, when they got run off their land by virtue of drought. They came into the cities, they started protesting. The Assad government said, oh, you can't protest. They said, oh, yes, we can. Look at, Egypt, Tunisia, all these countries, Arab Spring. And Bashar al-Assad's government apparently just, started shooting them. Bad idea, right? I mean, this led to a civil war, which is ongoing right now. So, what Obama didn't point out were two things that I think all Americans need to know is, number one, had that region not been so destabilized by Bush's wars, we probably wouldn't have seen, although we might still have, and I'll get to that in a second, we probably wouldn't have seen all the instability in the region. The so-called Arab Spring, the flipping of government in Egypt 3 times now, the government of Libya, the government, on and on it goes, right? we probably wouldn't have seen that. And originally, the neocons thought, oh, this is wonderful. Democracy's on the march. No, 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 no. There's millions of people dead and tens of millions on the march. And 500,000 of them are in Europe right now. And I want to talk about that, too, what that is doing to Europe and specifically what it's doing to Germany and what it's going to mean for Germany economically. And I'm going to get into that in just a minute, too. The other thing that President Obama didn't say is that arguably the whole thing in Syria started 5.5 years ago when this absolutely unprecedented drought hit Syria, which has not gone away. Syria is experiencing, and Syria is not the only country in the region, but this is across northern Africa and the Middle East. Syria is experiencing something very similar to what California is experiencing, but it does not have the water carrying or water drilling capacity or infrastructure that California has. If California was a third world nation, there would be a civil war in California right now. Because half the farmers would be out of business. They'd be crowding into the cities looking for food and jobs and shelter, which wouldn't be there. And half the people in half the cities wouldn't have any water to drink or flush the toilet. And that's what's going on in Syria. And this was a marvelous opportunity for President Obama to point out that, you could argue that the war in Syria was brought to you by ExxonMobil, which knew back in the 1970s that their product was causing global warming and chose, instead of doing something about it, chose to hire climate deniers and build an entire industry around that. And Koch Industries, the Koch brothers, oil barons who inherited an oil fortune from daddy, them too. President Obama could have called them out yesterday, but he didn't. So I think that would have been a wise idea, shall we say.